All right, let's jump right into a really fascinating world where ancient stories are literally meeting modern courtrooms. Today, we're going to explore how Sierra Leone's legal system is tackling a huge question. When a community's entire history is spoken, not written, how on earth does that history hold up in a court of law? Seriously, just think about that for a second. Imagine your family's right to the land you live on wasn't based on some piece of paper, but on a story passed down from your great-grandmother. Now, what happens when someone challenges that story? For millions of people, this isn't a hypothetical, it's reality, and it creates a massive legal challenge. And, that challenge sets up this fundamental conflict. We're calling it a tale of two truths. The truth that comes from tradition, bumping right up against the kind of truth that modern law demands. So, when we say traditional evidence, what are we actually talking about? Well, it's pretty much the lifeblood of a community's identity. It's the oral histories, the customs, the deep knowledge of who owns what land, all passed down person to person for generations. In a lot of places in Sierra Leone, this is the only record that exists. Now, check out this contrast. It's pretty stark, right? On one side, you have the oral tradition, stories from elders, what the community just knows to be true, testimony from chiefs, and on the other side, you've got what we typically think of as evidence, written documents, photos, hard data, expert reports. You can see right away how these two worlds are just set up to collide. And that collision, well, it has a legal name. We call it the hearsay hurdle. The easiest way to think about it is like a no gossip in court rule. Okay, so here's a perfect example. A witness gets up in court and says this. It's an honest statement. It's what they believe to be true. It's the history they were given. But from a legal standpoint, it's a huge problem. And the problem is that statement is technically hearsay. I mean, think about it. The court can't cross-examine the grandfather, right? He's not there. It's a statement made outside of court that's being used to prove a fact, where the land boundary is. Under the strict old-school rules of law, this incredibly important piece of evidence would just be tossed out, inadmissible, done. So how do you fix that? How does a legal system avoid just completely wiping out a people's history? Well, slowly, over a long time, the law started to build a kind of bridge between these two worlds. And it did that by creating some very specific exceptions to the rule. And these exceptions are absolutely crucial. Courts began to allow this kind of testimony for things like community land boundaries, or for figuring out family trees in inheritance cases. They even allowed for reputation, which is basically the court recognizing something the community has always known as a fact. But, and this is a big but, there was a critical condition. The original statement had to be made ante litem modum, which is just a fancy Latin way of saying before the dispute even started. To make sure nobody was just making stuff up to win their case. And you can see from this slide, this journey has been a long one. This wasn't some quick fix. We're talking about landmark cases stretching back over 100 years. Cases like Anguva Ada and Stool of Abinabina that slowly, piece by piece, carved out a space for oral history in the courtroom. And it all leads up to the modern framework we have now. Right. All of that history brings us to today, to what we're calling the 2024 game changer. This is where the legal system took all those old rulings and precedents and finally built a modern, comprehensive solution. And that solution is the Criminal Procedure Act of 2024. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, a criminal act? I thought we were talking about land disputes. It's a great question, but here's the thing. While it's a criminal law on paper, its rules on what makes evidence fair and reliable set a new standard for the entire country. It's like a ripple effect. When the highest level of law says this is the benchmark for good evidence, judges in all other courts, civil courts included, take notice. It ensures everyone is playing by the same fair rules. And one of the most powerful things this new act does is work as a filter. It makes sure that any traditional evidence is measured against the fundamental human rights that were laid out in Sierra Leone's 1991 Constitution. So here's the bottom line. Tradition is respected, but it's not absolute. Let's say there's a custom that's been around for centuries, but it discriminates against women when it comes to inheriting land. It doesn't matter how traditional it is. If it violates the Constitution, the CPA framework says a judge has to throw it out. It's a constitutional safety net, and it's a huge deal. So, all of this brings us to today, to what justice actually looks like in this modern age, where ancient tradition and modern human rights are finally working together. This table really lays out the new standards so clearly. You can see those older exceptions are still here, right? Like community reputation for land boundaries, but now they're more formalized, they're stronger. And then look at that bottom row. digital preservation. Using video and audio to record an elder's testimony, that is an absolutely revolutionary step forward.
This creates a whole new playbook for lawyers and judges. It's not enough anymore to just have an elder tell their story. Now, the best practice is to record it on video to preserve not just their words, but their knowledge, their demeanor. Then you corroborate it with physical proof. You actually take the court to go see that big cotton tree. And finally, you run it all through that all-important constitutional filter.
What you end up with is this powerful, brand new concept, verified tradition. This isn't about replacing the old ways. It's about honoring and preserving the wisdom of the elders by using the rigorous tools of modern justice and technology. It's the best of both worlds, really, making sure these vital stories aren't lost, but are actually strengthened and validated for the future. And that leaves us with one last big thought. What's happening in Sierra Leone is about so much more than court cases. It's a beautiful model for how we can respect our heritage while embracing the modern world. So the question for all of us is, where else, in other parts of our lives, can we find that same amazing balance between ancient wisdom and modern justice?